And there he is. He's back. Happy New Year. And I wasn't here to offer everybody my salutations and congratulations on the winter solstice. That's how long it's been since we've been back together. Hi, I'm Joe Pasevich. This is Control Room for January the 7th. We're already in 2026 and we're already into town meeting time and election time. I think the warrant for the annual town meeting is open, and I think you can get nomination papers now if you want to run for office in the Marshfield Town spring elections. How's that? How levels look good. So if you want to run for something, and there are races across the board. There's, of course, the select board race. Steve Darcy is not running for re-election. That's the last we heard. There's a planning board race coming up. The planning board needs to be replaced, my friends. If it wasn't for the planning board, we wouldn't have had to be forced to go to vote against MBTA zoning for the third time. You think the message would have been clear from the start that the town does not want MBTA zoning, all right? We do not get service from the MBTA. It's a relic, it's an accident, it's a leftover page of history that Marshfield got included into the MBTA district. We don't get anything from it. And then you can say, oh, we're adjacent, or somehow we benefit. Well, we don't. Okay, we should never have been included in that. And it's a canard. It's not about increasing access to the MBTA for a bunch of serf minimum wage workers that we're going to stack into boxes called high density, high capacity projects of an MBTA community, which is basically a euphemism for a 15-minute city. It's just not going to work. It doesn't apply to Marshfield and to probably most of the towns that are in the so-called MBTA district. But again, I got up at town meeting and I said to town meeting, and I addressed the officials, how many times do we have to vote against MBTA zoning before our leaders get the message that the residents don't want it? And in the meantime, while we're voting it down and we're being threatened, hollow threats basically from the state saying, oh, we're going to come in and we're going to appoint a receiver. And even the state wasn't saying that. They were going from the Milton MBTA zoning case where the state Supreme Court said it's a constitutional law and it's enforceable. Well, the enforcement was that there would be certain grant money that a town wouldn't get if they didn't adopt MBTA zoning. They kept adding on grant programs that the town, like a town like Marshfield, wouldn't be eligible for if they didn't adopt MBTA zoning. But still, the financial impact of the so-called lost grants, and again, grants are something you apply for, all right? Money for highway construction and for running the schools and other cherry sheet money that comes from the state is not affected by your compliance status with MBTA zoning. But they kept trying to gin it up and kept adding these ideas that, oh, the town's going to be defunded and we're going to send a receiver in. That's not part of the ruling that was made in the Milton case in front of the state Supreme Court. So the threats were basically hollow, insignificant, and there was no reason for us to adopt MBTA zoning into our zoning bylaws. And I made the statement, I said, why is the town bringing us back up for another vote? And why don't our leaders get the message that if the state is going to threaten us, then we need to put resources into a legal case against the state, against the EOHLC and the Attorney General's office. And so finally we did. Finally, the select board did direct town council to file lawsuits against the state in order to save us from suffering the consequences of being out of compliance. So finally that happened. And one of the cases is now going before the state Supreme Court in a few weeks. But I was one of the people, probably the first person that got up and said, why aren't we fighting this? And so we are. But still, the planning board brought it back for a third vote. They didn't have to. My sources tell me that the town planner and the town council were in communication on the matter. Did that influence the town planner's decision to put it again before the planning board? Did it affect the planning board's decision to put it on their agenda and to bring it back to town meeting? Because it didn't have to go back to town meeting. It could have stayed off the town meeting agenda, warrant. But the planning board went out of their way to bring it back. That's the way I understand the rules. If I'm wrong, planning board, Mike Viviano, somebody come on the air and explain it to me. But my understanding is the planning board did not have to bring it back. Which makes me wonder. The planning board's one of those elected boards that kind of flies under the radar. People hear about it and they go, I don't know, what do they do? It's like the Board of Assessors. They kind of fly under the radar. Well, what do they actually do? Nobody really knows. Believe it or not, some people don't even know what the Select Board does. But these other smaller or not as visible boards, like the Planning Board, even my Housing Authority, and the Board of Assessors, maybe 5% of the people in town have a clue as to what they actually do. But here's my point. All of these boards, up and down the line, are all making decisions affecting your tax rate and your quality of life. Even if you don't understand what some of these boards do right now, read up on them a little bit. Just Google Planning Board, Marshfield, or something like that. Look at the town charter. Look at the town bylaws. In there, it'll describe to you what these different boards and committees are supposed to do. And some of these boards don't, obviously Select Board is quite demanding in terms of the time required and the amount of knowledge that you have to understand the basic operations of it. But some of these other boards, you should consider running, whoever you are out there. So there's a planning board seat coming up. They need to be replaced. All right, they voted to bring back MBTA zoning. Didn't have to happen. There are other towns where the planning board said, no, we're not going to bring it back for another vote. All right, we'll take our chances with the state and we'll fight the state. Housing Authority, all right. In my opinion, Marshfield Public Housing, under the Housing Authority years ago in this town, mismanaged, neglected. There was somebody working on the Housing Authority who was submitting expense reports, a maintenance person, submitting expense reports without receipts and getting paid, whose relative was then the treasurer of the Housing Authority. You know who I'm talking about. All right, scandal, investigated, people almost were prosecuted. But nobody pays attention to the Housing Authority. I get on the Housing Authority, and my first objective is to make sure we're following public records law and open meeting law. Not even a few months of being on the Housing Authority, and I'm impeached. They're trying to remove me because I'm a troublemaker for wanting to follow the law. We should have had an election for another vacant seat on the Housing Authority last year. Town clerk wouldn't allow it. My conversations with the Secretary of State's counsel said we should have had an election. What happened? Bottom line, there's got to be an election this year for a Housing Authority seat. At the time, the town clerk gave some gobbledygook, mumbo-jumbo explanation as to why she wasn't going to put the Housing Authority election on the ballot last spring. Totally incomprehensible and vague and impossible, illogical. So hopefully there'll be 2 vacancies on the Housing Authority this year that'll show up on the spring ballot. And of course, the Select Board. Again, who's going to run for Select Board? There's a few names floating out there right now, including one guy named Rick Smith, who blew into town and in very short order, lightning speed, found himself as the chair of the advisory board. Now, how did that happen? Does it make you say, are these the things that make you go, So Planning Board, Select Board, Board of Assessors, Board of Health, Housing Authority, lots of races opening up. Papers are, I think, available, might be available now or in the next week or two. as are papers available, as is the warrant open for the annual town meeting. Special town meeting warrant opens a little bit later, but the annual town meeting warrant, I think it's open now. So if you got articles you want to put on there, go to it. Again, and being town meeting season, what is it also time for? It's time for your town leaders to be looking for more money from you. I think a contract with the firefighters union has been settled. A contract with the police, I think, has been settled. I think a contract with the teachers is coming up. Negotiations, if they haven't started, they'll be starting any day now. And the teachers will be looking for a raise. The teachers union will be advocating for a raise. And as always, there are other costs, so-called fixed costs, that go up on a regular basis year to year. Now, in a town with a budget of, what are we pushing, $120 million a year right now? And with a real estate evaluation, a real estate levy. What's the levy now? I forget what the levy is. What is it pushing? What is it pushing? Well, whatever the levy is, whether it's 60 million or 70 million, that is allowed to go up by 2.5% a year by under proposition, so-called the law, it's commonly referred to as Proposition 2.5, okay? So as the allowed levy, that's the amount of money that the town can send out real estate tax bills for. That is allowed to increase by 2.5% a year under the state law. And as that number grows year to year, the actual dollar amount of the 2% also increases year to year. On top of that, those revenues are local aid from the state and new growth, and also local revenues from local fees, everything from dog licenses to marriage licenses and stuff like that, which is routinely, annually, historically, always underestimated. So in other words, the town will, when they start putting their budgets together, they'll say, well, we anticipate collecting $1,100,000 from dog licenses and all the other fees that are levied upon people. Now, I'm not even talking about your water, sewer, and trash bills. That's something totally separate outside the general budget. But the town has a reputation and a history of tapping into those revenues to help balance the general budget, which is very bad. And thanks to John Cusick for doing a good job on tracking that down and bringing an end to some of that abuse. But there's another factor that they put into the formula to determine how much money we're going to have to play with and spend, and that is something called new growth. You wouldn't know it every time, like if you build an addition or a porch or you remodel your kitchen or do something major like that to your house, you got to get a permit, right? Now you got to pay the fee for the permit, for a building permit, a plumbing permit, electrical permit, et cetera, right? The value of your house goes up. So now when you get a real estate bill, it isn't, and your house was maybe worth $600,000. Well, now you did big improvements on the house that raised the value of the house. That's called new growth. Or you built a new house somewhere, which is happening all over town. Those are new revenues. So you've got $60 million that you can collect from all the homeowners and residents and property owners in town. But now you've got property worth $5 million more added to the town's real estate inventory. So now you can increase your revenue take by that amount of money. So you're not just collecting the $60 million, now you can collect $65 million. That's called new growth. That's a bump. That's more than 2.5%. You're collecting $65 million this year, and last year you collected $60 million, right? That's more than 2.5% increase. Oh, but that's allowed because that other $5 million is new growth. So they don't tell you that. So everybody goes, oh, Proposition 2.5, oh, it's terrible, it's holding us back, it's keeping us from getting the money we need for all these new and growing expenses. We're limited to increasing our tax take by 2.5% year to year. No. The tax take of the town goes up usually more than 3% a year. And what's the biggest source of expenses in a town? Salaries. Now, can we afford to give a 2.5 or 3% raise to everybody that's collecting a town paycheck? Absolutely not. You can't do that. So you can collect each year the revenue take can increase by 2.5 to 3%, and it should cover all those expenses related to raises, which typically are in the 1%, 1.5, maybe 2% increase per year. And they shouldn't be any more than that, because you simply can't afford it. In the old days, before Prop 2.5, there were towns that were raising taxes on the residents by like 10% a year. And that was just croaking people, driving people out of their homes and ruining the economy and taking away the ability to buy food and to spend money on discretionary items like maybe a new car or some work on the house or something, some new clothes or whatever. That was suppressing the economy. So if as long as the government can sort of tighten their belt and have a budget and some restraint like everybody else is doing in their regular lives, then a 2.5% per year plus new growth is very manageable. It provides all the money we need. But Prop 2.5 is now under really assault. But you know what? Sometimes I wonder. I don't want to feed into the argument for overrides and for getting rid of Prop 2.5, but I see an awful lot of people lined up at some of these stores. You know, the stores that sell little treats and coffees and stuff like that. Man, if I could afford to go to a coffee shop every day and have a cinnamon bun and a big giant coffee, I mean, whoo, boy, I could retire, but I can't do that. So what I'm trying to say is that, yes, there is money out there. If you're a government person and you live by MINE, mine, more is never enough, then you could make a case for saying, well, people can probably afford to pay a little more into the government coffers. Yeah, I can understand that, but not really, because the majority of people are living paycheck to paycheck, and if they needed $10,000 tomorrow, would have no way of coming up with it. That's just a statistic that's proven. But there is a move in this state, there's a move in Boston, there's a move in towns like Marshfield to have overrides to increase your taxes above the amount legally allowed under Prop 2.5, which includes, again, a 2.5% increase plus the new growth. So there's a move to get rid of or to water down Proposition 2.5 to take more of your money. What's the long-term big picture goal of that? Some people say it's socialism. They want to be like Sweden or Germany, where they take like 65% of your income. But at the same time, they'll bury you when the time comes. You know what I mean? They have more social services. We don't want to go that way. But anyway, I've been involved with Prop 2.5 issues for decades and decades. And I was honored to know Barbara Anderson, who was considered one of the chief proponents of Prop 2.5. And for the protection of Prop 2.5 when it was under attack and people were trying to water it down or get rid of it. Boy, those were some days. Those were a lot of battles we had. But so we found an old clip of Barbara Anderson. I just found myself, I went off screen here. There we go, that's better. I think the camera shifted on me. Pardon me. We found an old clip of Barbara Anderson. So here's a little bit of a blast from the past, and it feeds into our discussion. I want to talk a little bit about what's happening at after this clip. our interim town administrator, Charlie Sumner, and our town accountant, Meg LeMay, went before the select board a couple of weeks ago. You may have seen the meeting, and gave a presentation, initial presentation of the projected budget for next year. The budget, again, that's being worked on now. It's going to be presented at town meeting. And I don't know when town meeting is this year, like April 25th or something. I can't remember the date. And so far, what I'm seeing from their projections, they're not being totally upfront. They don't appear to be totally upfront. They appear to be cooking the numbers right now, or leaving out information and not showing how they got some of these numbers. One number they did come up with that made the headlines everywhere, and everybody's been talking about, is that Marshfield now is broke and that we're facing a $4.5 million deficit. Ooh. Now, the last few years, we've had massive surpluses at the end of the year. 5 million, 6.2 million, 6.5 million. Money left over at the end of the year. They budgeted so much, they spent this much, and at the end of the year, wow, we've got still $6 million we didn't spend. That's called free cash. And then they find ways to spend it. $250,000 for the police department, $600,000 for the facilities department, $100,000 over here, $500,000 for the schools over here. Try asking questions at town meeting. What is this? It's a nice round number. It makes you, a cynic like me says, they're trying to get rid of the free cash because it's an embarrassment. They don't want you to know that that you're being overtaxed and overcharged. So they need to find ways to get rid of it and then tell you at town meeting in the fall, at special town meeting, and say, well, we made a mistake and they really need this money and something came up and we need a $700,000 reserve fund because we've got all these projects that we think are going to happen during the winter and early spring and, blah, 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 blah. But you never really get a clear answer. So they have to rely on making you think that things are tight. And I don't know what our stabilization fund is. That's like our rainy day fund. I don't know where that's up to right now. But anyway, so what I'm trying to get at is that during this budget presentation, this first real budget presentation that happened at the select board a couple weeks ago, they came up with this number. We're facing a $4.5 million deficit. But then you look at some of the paperwork and you go, wait a minute, where does that come from? According to the projected budget for next year, our town budget is at 29 million plus. The school budget is projected at 60 million plus. And that's a significant increase over last year. But at the same time, it says here that $60 million plus school budget is with a 0% increase in salaries. So I'm going, well, how do you go from a number like 85 million to a number like 60 million, but there's no salary increase? When salaries is like 70, 80% or more of the budget. What are they spending $3 million on pencils? Or what? Where does that number come from? But the effect is this. The numbers are basically written out or conjured up somehow to make you to add up to a $4.5 million deficit. But the information is missing there. Now, is a South Shore Voc-Tech school payment in there? Is that a possibility? Did they include that into the school budget? Actually, it has to be voted on separately. Well, when you look at the projection for the South Shore Voc-Tech expenses next year, I think I found it was like $1.3 million. What year is that for? Fiscal 27, yeah. South Shore Voc-Tech, $1.393 million, almost $1.4 million. But then they had this big increase in the school budget on his projected chart for next year that easily would account for the 1.3 being added on to last year's totals, which would bring it up to around $86.5 million. But he's got a 60 million plus school budget with the notation saying that doesn't even include teacher salaries. So I'm wondering, does it really include teacher salaries? And why is your interim town administrator doing that to us at this point? I'm asking the question. Is that an accurate increase? Is it accurate that it does, is it true that it does not include an increase in salaries? Is it just a way are they just trying to look for a deficit number to scare the bejeebers out of you? And that's always the game. And what did you hear this interim town administrator, Charlie Sumner, say at the select board meeting? Oh, I've been involved in I'm paraphrasing a little bit now. Oh, I've been involved in overrides and I've always been successful. Ooh, you just made a lot of new friends among the status quo establishment around here, Mr. Sumner. And then he goes on to say that on another related matter, he says that the increases in the allocation of enterprise funds, from your sewer, water, trash fees, which again, historically have been a problem in this town. And Johnny Cusick's been on it for years. He's seen sewer, water, and trash fees get diverted into the general government. I think at one time Maresco's salary was 60 or 70% from sewer, water, and trash fees. Well, you've got to be able to justify that. You've got to say, well, how much work does Mike Maresco do at the wastewater treatment plant? Or how much does he deal with the DPW trash collection that we're going to give him so much of your ratepayer fees to his salary? It doesn't make sense. And the town engineers. Town engineers are heavily paid for by your ratepayer fees, your sewer, water, trash fees. When they do a whole range of work and review road construction, stuff outside of sewer, water, and trash operations. So historically, they underfund the DPW, including, and in particular, the engineers and engineering divisions. But they strip out more ratepayer fees from sewer, water, and trash to pay for things like Mike Maresco's, not Mike Maresco, but the town administrator's salary. So these are the kinds of things you got to pay attention to. And when you see these charts starting to be produced, you got to ask, well, where'd you get that number? All right? That's all I'm trying to say. And there are some people in town that do care about that stuff. Just as there are some people in town know that we have a planning board and a select board and a housing authority, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So right now, it seems like this is the season when they try to scare you, try to justify big overrides and little overrides. All right? And before I play the Barbara clip, there is an override vote coming up this Saturday. I hope people will go and vote. It's an override. In other words, it's saying we're going to add an extra amount of money to your tax bill above and beyond what we're allowed to add to your tax bill year to year. We're going to add an extra amount. Oh, for what, you say? It's the Martinson school roof replacement. All right? Right now, according to this information flyer sent out by the Town Democratic Committee, they produced a flyer, Town Democrat Committee produced, it doesn't, or they're publicizing it. They produced a flyer with the town seal on it. It looks like an official document. It might lead some people to think this is an official document. Town seal. My understanding of state law, that's illegal. You cannot use the town's, no person can use the town seal on a document. You can't do that. That's illegal, all right? What's the penalty? Well, they used the town resources to promote this high school override, and they got caught. And the building committee that used town resources to promote the high school override vote was actually fined. And the last I heard, most people on that committee refused to pay the fine, but that's another story. Here's the flyer that these people are putting out, and it says Saturday, January 10th, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., which is, I understand, is accurate. You got to go and vote. You should go and vote if you want to vote on an override to replace the Martinson School roof. Now, what does that mean? Well, some projections I've seen in the town hall's official website says that the school roof project is projected to cost like $7.8 million, $7.8 plus million. That's an estimate, all right? That's how much we want to appropriate to cover that. The state, under their school building authority, will reimburse half of that, approximately half of that. So the taxpayers ultimately will be out like $3.9 million, something like that. That's the projection. Whether or not it comes above or below, it's hard to say. Big construction projects, as most people know, sometimes don't go as planned, or sometimes they go better than planned, and they come out less. The town doesn't have, well, we have $7.8 million in free cash and stabilization funds. We could probably like write a check and say, here's a new roof, here's money for a new roof, and then the state will give us back $3.9 million down the road, and it's all paid for, done, right? Well, some people think that's not smart. We want to keep more money in our stabilization, our rainy day fund, and we want to keep more free cash available for emergencies, okay? So that's what they're saying we should do. We should borrow this money instead of just paying for it out of pocket. Now here's another option. We could borrow the money and pay it back over 20 or 25 years or something like that, but not increase your taxes. In other words, find out what it costs to pay off the loan and increase that as a line item in the budget, in the regular budget. Now, if you're running $5, $6 million plus surpluses year to year, how long would it take you to pay off $3.9 million? Right? It wouldn't take $5 or $6 million a year to pay off a loan like that, right? It might take a few $100,000 a year. So why not just borrow the money and then just pay back the loan without increasing everybody's taxes? In other words, we've already got enough tax revenue come in. We don't need to add to your real estate tax bill. We've already got enough money coming in from the real estate taxes that we can build in the cost of this new roof and pay it off that way. According to the flyer, the cost of replacing the Martinson roof, the cost to the taxpayers, if we do this override, right, is going to be about $23 a year, $2 a month. $2 a month, $23. Did your real estate tax bill go up more than $23 from year to year? Are we having $5 and $6 million surpluses? The question then becomes, why have an override? Why increase our taxes when there's already enough money coming in and in the bank now that we could pay for this roof by just getting a basic loan, floating a bond, and then paying that off? Right? Why not just do it that way? Why make it into an override? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Why do it that way? And here's part of the scandal with this whole story is that only the select board is allowed to put an override article on a town meeting warrant. And on this last town meeting that we had in the fall, special town meeting, what was on there? There was an article on the special town meeting warrant to have an override vote for a new roof. And the select board didn't put it there. The school department did. That's wrong. It's basically illegal. How did they get away with that? And then when Pam Keith got up at town meeting and said she wanted to amend the article so that it said raise the money by whatever means is deemed to be best, so that it didn't require an override, that it could be a borrowing issue. The select board could just vote to borrow the money as authorized by town meeting if the article had been amended that way. And the town council basically just like threw a bunch of gobbledygook out, in my opinion, and confused the issue. And Pam Keith ended up just dropping the amendment. And unnecessarily. It should have been kept. The amendment should have gone through. So in other words, the override, the bottom line here, my friends, is the override is unnecessary. The money could be borrowed. The amount that it would cost to pay off a loan to fix the roof is really tiny. So why bother putting an increase in taxes on the taxpayers in Marshfield? Why? Why? It doesn't make sense. Are they setting us up? Are they trying to protect the existing tax levy, which they are planning on adding to? See, there is an override being talked about now, and it's not a debt exclusion override to pay for a simple thing like, oh, the lights are blinking on me here. It's not, this is just a simple override to pay for a one-time item. I wonder why the lights are going out. I'll have to check them. What they're looking for now is an override to pay. This is like a one-time override. Once the loan is paid off, the override, the tax increase goes away. They're looking for an override that would be a permanent increase on your real estate taxes. Let me check this light switch. Hold on a sec. Oh, I don't know if that's any better. We just had a sort of a partial power failure here. What else is new? Oh, there it goes. So again, this override is not necessary. They are planning on a bigger override, and part of the initial setting up the landscape, all right, laying the foundation for a big operational override, which is what they call a forever override. This override for the roof will be just like taking money out, adding money to your tax bill each year, and then giving it to the people that we borrow the money from in order to pay for the roof. Then once the roof is done and that job is all and the project is paid for, that drops off of your tax bill. The other override they're setting you up for is for a forever override based on massive shortfalls that to me right now are not being explained or rationalized, all right? There's some funny business going on here in the projections, and these numbers need to be explained. But the obvious intent to my mind, but I'm a cynic, is to scare the bejeebers out of you and say, oh boy, get ready, a big override's coming. But they're cooking the numbers, all right? They're cooking the numbers. Let's watch the clip of Barbara now. Barbara Anderson, rest her soul. Why, she was a saint. She did more than you can imagine for
it links
for the taxpayer.
The property tax growth to the rate of inflation that the cities and towns have to pay for goods and services. Isn't that a fair way to do things?
Yeah, it'd be great when inflation hits, say, 11 or 12% as it did during Jimmy Carter's years. It isn't just his proposal, it's the proposal of Hamill from the Shawmut Bank. The banks are in trouble. The Shawmut Bank was running in the red last quarter. I'm sure this is the first person I'd go to ask for a suggestion on how to run the state. The banks need someplace that will borrow, and the business community is in trouble. So now you can change 2.5, because part of the proposal is not just to allow taxes to go up at the rate of inflation, it's to allow debt exclusion to be outside of 2.5 without a vote of the people. So now the cities and towns will be encouraged to borrow more. I'm sure that will suit the Shawmut Bank, which up until a year or so ago was doing about 50% of the municipal business.
You're claiming an ulterior motive then on the part of Mr. Hamill.
Absolutely. The banks in general will benefit from leaving debt exclusions outside of Prop 2.5 and not having to convince the voters that incurring more debt for their community is a good idea. As for increasing it for the rate of inflation, or even for that matter, a debt exclusion, the voters can do that. They simply have to ask. Roughly half the time a voter override passes, so that people are open to suggestion. But in this case, the governor is saying that people should not be allowed to make that decision. He will make it for it, he and the downtown banking community.
What about the auto excise portion of that, which is separate from 2.5, but was changed along with when 2.5 was passed?
Yeah, when 2.5 was passed, we cut the auto excise tax. They've been trying to find some way to tax cars at their full and fair market value ever since. They do such a great job analyzing the full and fair market value of our homes. And now they want to chase our cars around to figure out the full and fair market value. This will hit the auto industry again, which is, of course, where the sales tax revenue decline has come in. So this is guaranteed to make sure that the sales tax revenues in the state continue to decline. Brilliant idea, Michael. I don't know why we didn't think of it first.
Barbara, but don't cities and towns need some flexibility in raising revenues? They can't look to the state, it seems, to get more revenues in the future. And your own proposal is proposing to cut state tax revenues in the future. So where do cities and towns go?
Well, in the first place, they can go to the voters. That's what the Prop 2.5 override provision is there for unusual situations. Certainly, I think you might consider the state deficit situation unusual. At least I would hope so. So that's what the override provision is there for, is a safety net for the cities and towns.
So what should a community so what you're saying that if the voters disapprove of raising taxes above 2.5% in their community, they just have to cut until they meet that requirement?
Well, they have to do whatever the voters in their community want. These voters are the ones best qualified to know what their community is like. If, in fact, possibly there was so much local aid during the 80s that maybe these communities were living a little high themselves and weren't restraining themselves. Maybe some communities need to do that. Other communities weren't getting perhaps their fair share of local aid. Others have stabilization funds that they had sense enough to set aside. Others do not. Only the voters in a community can really determine whether their town is well managed or poor or what the situation is, and only they know if they can afford higher property taxes, especially with layoffs in the private sector, which means you wouldn't have any money to pay your higher property taxes with.
You know, the fundamental assumption of everything you say, and sometimes, I really do think you have an active mind, and I really find myself saying, gee, what if she's right?
Takes one to know one, Andy.
I don't see the conspiracy theory, though, between the banks and Beacon Hill, but it is interesting. The fundamental assumption is let the voters decide. If you ask the voters, that will be fine. The voters can somehow decide that whether their town is well run. But
better than I can.
Well, right, and presumably better than Beacon Hill can. But the problem is, human beings are selfish. I mean, that's basically human beings are selfish. And you take an example of schools.
Is this going to be a philosophical discussion?
It's a half-hour show, but it's not endless. So it'll be.
Well, what does selfish mean? I mean, selfish means one's self-interest.
One's self-interest.
Which can be long-term as well as short-term.
Yes, but by self-interest, let's put it in a local context. I'm an older person. I don't have people in schools. I've paid my way for schools. I'm not interested any longer in supporting schools. Whatever they've done for the community, they're not going to do for me. Consequently, I don't want to override 2.5 to raise money for schools because, after all, I'm not going to be getting anything for it.
That's an unfair assumption. First of all, some of the most active people I've seen in promoting overrides have been senior citizens.
Go ahead.
There's no reason to assume that senior citizens wouldn't see a larger picture and see the benefit to society to having an educated population. Never mind the selfish motive that they want that educated population working to support them in their old age with Social Security. So that's an inaccurate assumption and unfair to senior citizens and their ability to see the big picture.
Let me change it a little bit then.
Why don't you do that? You weren't doing real well with that one, Andy.
In an effort to broaden it. I don't only mean older people who've had kids already go through schools. I mean single people. I mean younger people who don't have kids. There are a lot of people who look at schools as something that doesn't necessarily impact them. But schools to me is just one example of services, libraries. There may be people that don't want libraries. How do you get people to contribute to the collective good if that is what the society is supposed to be all about?
How have they done it? And roughly half the time the overrides and debt exclusions have passed. If what you were saying is true, you would never see voluntary tax increases. You would never see a majority of voters voting to increase their property taxes. And in fact, you see it all the time.
But look at the backdrop of what we have now. We have escalating taxes. We are hit with news that there is a deficit of over $2 billion. There is some genuine...
Keep your numbers in perspective here. I mean, even earlier you said $1 billion was what our petition would cost. Let's talk about fiscal year, the fiscal year at a time. You're not talking about $2 billion for fiscal 90 or $2 billion for fiscal 91.
When I say $2 billion, I'm talking about...
An accumulated deficit. If we go up to the year 2040, you're hitting, real money. So let's define what period of time we're talking about with our deficit numbers.
Which is also assuming no changes, for example, in Medicaid, which is $500 million of Richie Volk's...
You're assuming that they don't do a thing to downsize government between now and next year, yes.
But the basic question is, since the cost of government is going up, and everyone sees that, and since there is internationally less a feeling here that we control our own destiny because there are more things out of our control, and as we have this enlightened self-interest, long-term and short-term, and more people are interested in what they need to do for their families and themselves, how do you make people see the bigger picture, the obligation to society?
I think people see the bigger picture, which is that if we pay another $1 billion in taxes this year, setting aside 2.5 now, which would be even more, The package they're looking at is $1 billion, and they don't downsize government, and government continues to expand, and we don't address the waste and mismanagement, then next year you're looking long-term at another $1 billion increase. Then the year after that, you're looking at even more of $1 billion plus, because you still have this expansion of government, and people looking at their long-term best interest figure. I can't afford to stay here, and if I don't stay here, and other productive citizens don't stay here, and we can't make it, and the private sector starts to deteriorate even further, who is going to provide those essential services as part of that social ideal? Where's the money going to come from if our economy goes down the tube because they can't control their spending?
Marvelous. Barbara Anderson was a marvelous person. I like Andy Hiller's line of questioning when he says, how do we make people see what's best for for society? What's the real social good? Our obligations. How do we make people see that? Well, you first make them see that by showing them where the money's coming from and how much there is, and being transparent about the costs and the expenses. That's what it all comes down to. And having a Prop 2.5 in place, and which requires then a debate about budgets and expenditures, is a way to get people involved and informed, instead of just some dictator just saying, "Oh, this is the money we need," and hands up, this is a stick up, pay it or else. That's part of what Prop 2.5 basically instituted, was basically a system of accountability. That's why it's so important to do it this way. And for people to have that debate over how much it's costing us and how it's affecting our ability to survive and live around here, and how to innovate and how to reduce costs. That's part of the whole idea behind Prop 2.5, was to create that level of accountability. So I don't know. I could watch that. I could watch that clip over and over again. In fact, I might want to watch it over and over again, because it's just a marvelous insight into the genius of Barbara Anderson and the people that helped initially to bring about the concept of Prop 2.5. And like Barbara pointed out, oftentimes these overrides do pass. I think it was at one point, I don't know what the percentage is now, but at one point, I think in the earlier days, like when this interview was conducted, I think half of all overrides were passing, because people were making that judgment that, yeah, I could afford this and I'm willing to sacrifice, or the town collectively as a vote determined that it was a doable thing. Now, of course, like any political campaign, an override vote is subject to manipulation and propaganda and misrepresentation and stuff like that. So I can't explain how half of the overrides basically pass in this state and half of them don't. But that's a great find to see Barbara again explain some of the logic and the rationale behind Prop 2.5. And like she said, we don't have control over some budgets, like the state budget. How come we don't get to vote on that? The only way you can vote on that is to get rid of your legislators. And how easy is that to do? It's almost impossible. And I bring that up because just about 3 weeks ago, this article came out. Massachusetts lawmakers exceed budget for the 4th year. Boston, a multi-year patent continues on Beacon Hill. This is by Olivia Ray. Posted December 15th. Is from WWLP Channel 22, an NBC affiliate in Western Mass. A multi-year patent continues on Beacon Hill of lawmakers spending far more than was designated in their budget for each fiscal year. During fiscal year 25, which ran from July 24 to June 25, state lawmakers appropriated and spent around $64 billion, far more than the 57.7 set aside in the original budget for that year. So they set aside 57.7 billion and spent 64. So this is what's happening, is these supplemental budgets year after year after year. So the fiscal 26 budget, which is the year we're in now, sitting at 60.9 billion, is the fourth time since 2019 that prior year's spending outpaced the next year's budget. There were supplemental spending bills that just kept coming up. In prior years, these supplemental appropriations served as small adjustments totaling between 1% and 4% of the annual budget. Now the usage raises questions about what the written budget debated for months and passed into law actually means. You have all these debates and discussions, they advertise this as the budget, and then forget about it. Nothing to see here, folks. Go back to your work. We'll handle the supplemental budgets. So we're on a string, but we don't get to vote on that, and it gets covered up. And Massachusetts is one state that per person, per taxpayer, you've got the most debt on your back of almost any other state. They don't tell you about that. That's like the national debt, $38 trillion. And now Trump wants to spend how many trillions of dollars to buy Greenland? You don't hear about that, do you? But that gets sucked out of you because it means decreased value of your dollar and increased taxes and percentages on loans. And so that is extracted from you. You're paying for that national debt of $38 trillion because your dollar is worth less and more money gets taken out for taxes. They don't tell you about that. It's a shell game. Here's some more commentary on Prop 2.5, the status of Prop 2.5.
You mentioned Prop 2.5, which obviously I think was passed in 1978. Mass Municipal Association, the organization of cities and towns, just did a study, concluded that, these are my words, not theirs, that it's not working, too restrictive in these times. Should the legislature take a look at and potentially repeal Prop 2.5 and let cities and towns do what they want to do with the property tax?
Yes, I mean, that is the model in most places around the country. And I will say, just
Yes,
for a
meaning
little
they
bit,
should repeal it.
Yes, we need a new system.
Okay.
I would be happy if that came through a repeal pathway. I'd be happy if it came through a different pathway. Certainly we need some structure in place. However, the name says it all, right? This is Prop 2.5, not because of that's the order of the chapters that it comes in and it is, Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 2.5. No, 2.5 means 2.5%. That is the cap that is put on increases annually in the property tax levy for every municipality that is paired.
Isn't it kind of sad that, she has to talk to you like you're an idiot? Like nobody knows what the number 2.5 means. Like it's like Mass General Law Chapter 2.5 or something like that. Isn't that kind of sad? But in some ways it's true. Some people need to be given some very, very basic information. And that's the way it's been, even in this town.
With a requirement that cities, unlike other levels of government, have to have balanced budgets by law. And so we can never overspend what we don't have. Prop 2.5 itself came as a response to tax classification, which happened a couple years earlier than that in the 70s, which was the move to separate out rates for commercial versus residential properties. At first, everything was taxed in the same way. And then by law, there was an initiative led by community members and residents to say, in fact, residential properties should have a lower tax rate because you use commercial properties to make money and you use residences to go to sleep at night. It's different purposes, and let us split that up. So now commercial properties are charged differently and higher than residential properties, restricted again very tightly by state law in certain ratios and certain changes. But overall, commercial and residential together cannot increase by more than 2.5% every year. If you go back to the
Except
beginning,
for new construction.
except for new
yeah.
construction, and then there are additional revenue sources like motor vehicle excise,
Yeah.
fraction, blah blah blah. Since that provision was in place, if you average it all out, just the rate of inflation on average has been 25% higher than 2.5% increase every year. So just to maintain the same level of services and not have to have cuts, municipalities are having to figure out an additional 25% from somewhere, whether it's new construction, like cities, larger cities or commercial centers may be able to have, or other ways like going to the ballot.
Yeah, okay, Mayor, well, that's enough for you. So you get the picture. So pay attention to the budget discussions and head out to the polls on Saturday. Vote no for the override. It's not necessary. I'm Joe Pasevich for Control Room. Thanks for joining me. Happy New Year. Merry Christmas. Sorosh's Thvom for you Orthodox people out there. Today is Christmas on the old calendar. Good night, everybody. Oh.